So for this week's video, I'm tackling another Littlest Pet Shop custom from the also famous short-hair cat base. I mean, seriously though, this base is super popular in the LPS customizing industry, like, people use it a lot. And I guess I myself am following that little train. I start off by removing the factory paint with nail polish remover. You can also use acetone if you have some. I did keep in mind that this custom is going to be a dark gray, almost black color, so I brushed off removing most of the factory paint itself. With the concept I plan laid out, I start on sculpting the main details I want the custom to have. I mix equal parts of kneadatite, or green stuff as most people call it, which itself is frequently used in the customizing industry. And not long ago did I finally get my hands on this stuff, and it's been great so far. Kneadatite itself is very strong on its own, and unlike normal air dry clay that I used on my last custom, I don't have to glue it on the pet, which is great. After shaping the clay into a worm-like shape, I slowly built up the quote-unquote hair for the pet, I guess you can say. This part is very tricky because the glue from the kneadatite is so strong I have to use water so it doesn't stick to my hands, but it ends up sliding off the pet's head, which isn't good either. After the kneadatite finally behaves, I slowly built up the hair upwards, being mindful not to damage the lower layer, which is proving to be a challenge. Here's what we have so far. Not so bad if I do say so myself. While I wait for the clay to dry, I decided not to waste time and started on the cheek fur. I want this custom to have an extra oomph of fluff to it, that's why I'm adding the cheek fur thing. After a lot of pinching and smoothing out the clay, this is what I got. Not bad. Now for the second pass. At this point, I don't really know what I'm doing. I just try my best to pinch out the clay here and there just to make it look a little bit believable, at least. Although I am heavily relying on the sanding to get this to look like fur and blend it in with the actual plastic itself. Which, mind you, I have no idea will work or not. Now for the little fluff in the ears. So cute. I was a bit hesitant to add this part because I knew I was going to have a ring piercing for the pet, but I ended up adding it instead because I feel like it makes an extra oomph of fluff to it, and I told you guys I want this to be fluffy, so why not? It was a bit of a struggle because it was such a tiny space that I have to push this clay in, and my hand is just so big. Even though I have like tiny hands, it still wouldn't go in as well, and I still need my tools to help me. After adjusting it here and there, it did have some little bumps in it because of the tool I was using. I hope I can smooth this out in the sanding process. Now for the tail floof. I didn't want it to be extra fluffy, I just kind of wanted it to be smooth yet not so fluffy like a Persian cat tail. I still kind of wanted to have that floof to it, but not technically the whole tail, kind of just at the end of it. After that, I did smaller passes of clay to get that fur texture I wanted. Now I know the sculpting part is going on forever, but just bear with me here, we're almost done. Just a couple more passes, you know? Anything to make the pet look good. And that includes patience, which in this custom, I do not have. A little bumpy, not my best work, but hopefully I can smooth this out in the sanding process. Again, can you tell I'm heavily relying on this? Okay, so I know my main focal point for this custom, and you can see it in my planning sketch, is for this custom to have a jacket. After fiddling around off camera, I realized I need more practice, and it didn't look good at all. And so I decided to go for a collar approach instead. And just for an added touch of accent, I decided to add this little ring to it just to make it look a little fancy. I wasn't really thinking when I was placing the ring, I just kind of placed it on there and hope for the best. And it tends to not work out like that most of the time. But I figured since kneadatite is so strong, I hope that it'll hold the ring in place just long enough for it to cure. And it ended up staying in place for a while. And after adding some finishing touches for the paws, the body modification is complete. This was a lot of modifications, so you know what that means? Sanding time! sanding for days. This part took me a lot longer than expected. And no matter how much I try to smooth down the clay with water, it still ends up with a lot of bumps. What can you do? Use a couple grades of sandpaper to help move you along. I normally start off with the rough stuff first just to sand down the big bumps, and then come in with the smaller grains to help smooth it out. What I'm trying to do in this stage is to have the transition from clay to plastic look seamless. I switched over to the nail file for this. Using a nail filer makes it easier to get into the tiny crevices rather than the bigger sanding paper. Also try my best not to hit the ring. But the ring didn't end up holding long and popped off, which results in 2 holes in the collar. To salvage this, I used sewing needles to poke holes along the collar so it looked like it was intentional, because it wasn't. Now that that's done, time to paint! I started painting the pet with 2 layers of watered down white acrylic paint. You may be wondering, why am I painting the pet if the pet is going to be black anyways? Why don't I just paint it black right away? Well, in this case, I didn't want the pet to be full out black, I just wanted to be a dark kind of grayish color, which in this case, I want to cover up most of the green as much as possible because I don't want any different tones here. So that's why I'm painting the pet with 2 layers of white just in case. I also keep in mind that I want the white acrylic paint to be relatively thin, so that when I paint it on the darker color, the many layers from the white will overall make the paint look thick and pretty muddy. Does this make sense? I don't know if it makes sense. After I was done and the paint was fully dry, I came in with the darker colors. Even though it's a darker color, I still need a couple layers just to make the paint look smooth and seamless. I use Liquitex acrylic paint, by the way, and if you're wondering what materials I use, all of them will be listed in the description. Here's our progress so far. For some reason, the paint is shiny. To make it appear matte again, I'll be using Mr. Super Clear UV Cut Flat, which at this point hasn't technically arrived in the mail yet, so... Using Mr. Super Clear, I sprayed the LPS for about 2 times, making sure I covered everything. Also remember to wear a mask and spray in a ventilated area. And here he is! Here's a before and after. Not bad, huh? When I spray, I make sure to get every nook and cranny so it looks seamless. To make the custom appear more fancier and maybe add a bit of finesse, I lightly brushed on silver metallic paint to the hair and the fluff inside his ears. Next, I started on his fur patterns. It was a little tricky getting the lines to match up, and maybe I could have used a pencil before I went all out, but you know, we made mistakes. Mistakes happen. Learn from my mistakes, people. Now for his little nose pattern. I make sure to go slow and not rush anything to limit mistakes. Initially, I was going for black patterns, but I decided to go for white instead because I feel like it contrasts a lot with the darker fur and then it makes the LPS pop more. I don't know if it was a good choice, but you know, I did it, so can't turn back. Now for the tip of his ears. I was debating whether or not I should go black or white. Once again, I was hesitant with this part, and that just proves to me that I didn't plan this custom far enough. In the end, I went for white instead, as you can see here, and I also did it on both of his ears just to make it look more symmetrical. Now for the tip of his paws. I did plan this out actually. And here we are! A little bumpy and rough, but I gotta admit, I was a little rushed when I was doing this. Then I came back in and cleaned out the lines. After I'm done, I came in again with another coat of Mr. Super Clear just to seal everything up before I move on to the next layer. Every time they build up color, I use another coat of MSC just to seal the progress before moving on. It's kind of like saving your progress in Photoshop and making a new layer. The coat of MSC did matte the metallic paint just a tad bit, so I went in again with a little bit more paint, this time using the dry brush technique. And now comes to the moment we've all been waiting for at this point, the eyes. I start out by sketching the iris and eye shape with a simple HB pencil, just the usual. This time I want the eyelid to be a little closed to express an aloof look. In this case, it also adds to the character's personality a little bit, given the expression of very calm and wise looking. And then I went in and added some opacity. Then I started sketching the iris. At this stage, I could have went in with my watercolor pencils just for a more clean look, but I figured since most of the details are going to be in acrylic anyway, the watercolor pencils aren't going to do me any good, so I ended up using HB pencil instead. I'm going for a side-eye approach this time because I feel like it matches the character really well. It felt a little funny not being able to draw the full eye, but the effect worked, so it's okay. Time to add the colors. One of the main designs for this character is to have different eye colors. I was hopping around between different colors in my sketching process, like green and purple or pink and blue, but I ended up settling on blue and yellow instead. I feel like it matches the character pretty well. I laid down the flat colors first, making sure once again that the paint isn't too thick. I soon went in with a darker orange to shade the eye color. Out of everything I just did, this is probably the hardest part. Getting the acrylic itself to lay flat and have a smooth gradient isn't easy. I should have used the watercolor pencils to shade in the eyes because I knew it would be so much easier. But since I already laid down the white color, I was afraid that the pencil is going to scratch up the color underneath. So that's why I persevered with acrylics. This entire project itself just proves that I have poor planning skills. After getting frustrated just a little too much, I moved on to the blue eye instead. For some reason, the darker blue is so much easier to blend. Maybe since because the other eye is yellow, it's harder to get a darker yellow without making it look extremely muddy. And the blue overall just looked really smooth and bright. Alright, back to the yellow eye. I was trying my best to push both values to make it look more bright and saturated. Once again, I continued the battle of pushing the orange down further into the eye and pushing the yellow upwards, and then it just turns into a big mess. Next, I color in the pupils with black so that the eye would have more dimension to it. Also blending that out with an indigo color so that it wouldn't look too harsh. I've seen artists like this on Instagram where their pupils are actually really fuzzy and blend in with the iris a lot, and I really like that look. And so that's why I kind of want to give it a try on this custom. Now for the other eye. Oh my. I once again come in with a darker brown just to shade the eye just a tad bit more. I once again tried my best to push and pull the values in the right places. And now the eyes are complete! Yay! For the finishing touches, I also darkened up the lash line. By now you might have noticed the light blue gradient coming in the eye whites. I did that so the eye would have more 3D and dimension to it. Also to add more color. Now for the eye shines. Okay, I gotta admit, I wasn't really satisfied with the yellow eye, so I went in again with more orange just to brighten it up a little bit. Okay, now he's really finished. I make sure to give it one more layer of MSC before I move on. Now for the last and final accessory, the color. First, I painted the color a light yellow color so that the metallic paint would have more chance of shining through. Using my trusty gold metallic paint, I started painting the color. Trying my best not to color outside the color because that would be a mess that's hard to clean up. To make the color look more old and worn, I watered down some black acrylic paint and lightly painted on the collar, making sure I push the pigment into the holes and crevices. Next, I come in with the tissue paper to slightly dab off the black paint. I try to be very light-handed on this one because I still want the black acrylic paint to show, but not too harsh. And here's the finished collar! It really matches his eye too. Initially his color was going to be black, so to make it stand out, I would gloss it with varnish so that it would have a different texture to it. But as you can see here, I went with gold because I feel like the character needs more color. Also, after I'm done, I spray the LPS one more time before moving on to the last step. Using my trusty Liquitex gloss varnish, I glossed the eyes, the nose, and the collar. And with that, our little custom is complete! I decided to name him Lea. I know that's kind of like a girl name, but I feel like it suits him really well and my friends really recommended this name. So Lea it is. This custom was a lot of fun to make, even though it can be a pain in the butt sometimes, but I hope you guys have fun watching this video. I feel like between this one and my last little pet shop custom, which is the Fun Time Pretty one, this came out way more high quality. Working in a small scale can take a lot of practice, and I'm glad I see improvement. Anyway, thank you everybody so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. I'll see you all in my next video. Bye!